It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Yes, indeed. We are here and we have another great show lined up for you today. Today's topic is on maintenance. Maintaining that beautiful yard, your landscaping, or maybe it's a little shaggy and needs some maintenance. That's what we're talking about here today. We're going to talk about pruning, trimming, fertilizing. And I wanted to go into some ideas on tools and what's tools to use. If you don't have tools, what can be rented. And then if you do own the tools, proper maintenance and of the equipment is very important. So I wanted to talk about that today as well. And that way the equipment that you do have will not only work and function properly, but last you a long time and get you all your money's worth out of it. So let's get started and jump right into it. The first thing that comes to mind when maintaining a landscape area or landscape yard, front yard, backyard, side yards, no matter how big or small your property is pruning and trimming. So let's kind of dive into that first. There's a couple different techniques on pruning and trimming, and I don't know, maybe the terminology helps, but when you hedge plants, it's pretty common. People have either hedge shears, the scissor type pruners, or the electric hedge shears or motor gas powered. And unless you have a formal garden, I really wanted to start here because plants are not supposed to really be boxes and brown balls and really kind of squared off things unless it's a very formal garden. If you have a formal garden and you have hedges, then yes, the hedging shears makes a lot of sense. I'm a big proponent of what we call selective pruning with pruners and hand pruning things. What I mean by that is selectively picking a branch and pruning one branch at a time and doing it at different lengths so that it kind of looks more natural. It doesn't look that things really shouldn't look like they're just got pruned, heavily. And so there's a couple things to think about. Number one, you should be doing it regularly, at least once a year, unless it's a really slow growing bush or shrub and you're wanting it to get bigger. Then obviously you can let it grow for 2-3 years. I don't know many plants that need zero pruning unless you just have a massive slope and you can just let the plant do whatever it's going to do. But even then, they don't grow in necessarily the shape that we want to see them in. Number one, plants could care less whether you prune them or not. They don't really need pruning. Pruning is simply done for aesthetics. It's because we want a plant to look a certain way. We want it to be a certain shape. And so when you're out there pruning it, we're really pruning for ourselves. And so we should make them look, as good as they could. But you want it, in my opinion, to look natural, like possibly the plant could have just grown that way naturally on its own. To me, that's some of the best pruning techniques. Now, there are some prunings that do help the plant. For instance, if they were cross-branching and the branches were rubbing against each other and causing damage, you could help the plant along by eliminating some of the inner growth. If plants get too dense and full, they can actually create little homes for insects that could damage the plant. So, there are some pruning things that will help the plant, but mostly the plant's just growing, it's trying to do its thing and bloom. And then again, when we prune for deadheading and pruning dead flowers off of there, it's because we don't want to see them. It's because we want it to continue flowering, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the plant will definitely keep blooming and things will look better. So on the pruning techniques, I really go for what's called selective pruning for the most part. If you do have a hedge, if you have a living wall, if you have a barrier between you and your neighbor, and you're just trying to keep it thin, narrow, but tall, and you want it to be dense and blocking out the view and using it as privacy, then hedging it makes perfect sense. I feel like sometimes we're pruning and hedge trimming, like, if you had a lot of shrubs and you don't know how to prune them, it's very quick. The gas powered and electric power hedge trimmers will prune things very fast and you can get the job done. I don't know. I just don't like the way they look when it's finished, if they're in round balls and boxes and these types of shapes, unless that's really what you're going for, like little boxwood hedges along walkways that are squared off. That can look good. And if you have natural things inside there, complementing the formal with some natural, and if it's a style thing, then I get it for sure. I mean, topiaries would be a prime example of, yes, hedging makes sense. You're trying to make it into an actual shape. Usually I like those in pots, in areas, but it's pretty rare that I see a true formal garden anymore. I think of like large, castles or, huge properties where they have hedges or they have, water features and hedgerows around the sides of them. And they can be a very formal, nice look if that's what you're going for. I think for the most of us with just, you've got a home with a front yard and a backyard, and it's kind of natural looking with just, maybe you've got some lavenders and rosemary. You've got a few rose bushes, or, maybe you've got kind of native-y with manzanitas, or, there's all kinds of ceanothus and, things that look really good, bloom, the glossy, nice leaves. Even though some of these are native, they can look quite beautiful. But if you hedge them and turn them into a ball, to me it just doesn't look good. And if you get in there and selectively prune, you can still get it into a roundish shape, but have it look kind of spiky, like even when you get your hair cut, if you're having, any kind of a style, they're not going to just, give you a military style haircut unless, that's what you're going for. So with plants, selective pruning, it's much better. It looks much better. I think that plants actually take to it a little better because they're not growing all the growth right on the tips of everywhere where you hedge. You can actually cut a branch out. Now, if it's too big and you're really having to hack that plant back, then you waited too long. So it's okay to do that to get it back into shape of where you want it. But that tells you should be pruning more often. And the same thing with trees. If you're pruning your trees and you're making huge 3-4 inch size, cuts on a log on the branch, when I see that on trees, it just tells me you waited way too long to cut that branch off. You can see it's growing in the wrong direction from when it's a 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick, and those are a much better time to prune. And opening up the centers and getting it kind of a nice overall shape. I love pruning trees. They can be very rewarding. If you have like a strawberry tree, pretty common, a lot of strawberry trees out there, they have that beautiful trunk and the reddish, tinge to them, and you can kind of expose that, open it, especially if it's a multi-trunk. A lot of multi-trunk olives out there. Olives can get very dense and, not looking so nice the way we want to see them. And so we can thin them out and let some air in there, expose the trunk and give them a shape. Cut them if they're getting, higher than what you want them. You can kind of trim them, but let them kind of grow naturally. Get in there and do it, at least once a year, even a couple times a year if you've got time. And what I like to do is combine fertilizing with right as you're kind of pruning in the same, like time frame, so that, because pruning, when you prune a plant, you're stimulating growth and you're really encouraging that plant to grow. So, even though we kind of have year-round summer here on the Central Coast, you want to time it. You can feel when the nights get cold and you can kind of tell the plants are kind of slowing down a little bit. Not the best time to do hard pruning and fertilizing, because you're stimulating growth with the pruning, and then the fertilizing goes along with that. So for the most of the year, from between March all the way really through November, you can do the pruning and fertilizing, and you're going to be just fine. And I recommend doing it together, because the pruning stimulates a new growth, and then if you add the nutrients in with the fertilizer at the same time, and you give it extra water with the hose, and always water in after you fertilize, your plants are just going to love it, and they're going to really respond good, and they won't be looking pruned, for very long, because the new growth will come right away. So if you do, make the mistake of waiting too long, then make sure that you're doing that hard pruning as early in the year as possible. So you've got the whole rest of that year for the plant to kind of recover. If you can start it in early spring and give it all spring and summer and fall to, get back into shape, you're going to be better off than doing it, in August, September, October type time frame. And you do hard pruning then the plant's kind of got to go through the winter, without having fully recovered. And it really won't look good as fast until the following year. So, okay, I wanted to talk about the tools now. And if you do have a lot of hedges and you don't have the gas-powered hedge shears, even as much as I cringe to say it, you can, rent those and make your life easier if you have a large property or, maybe you own a business with commercial property with hedges, that makes sense. Now, there's other types of equipment that's used in maintenance, and it not always has to do with plant material. I'm thinking of like decomposed granite pathways. We use a lot of decomposed granite out in landscapes where you want kind of hardscape, but you don't really want to put down pavers or concrete, and you want it to retain kind of a natural look. We use decomposed granite a lot. Well, over time, when you first install it, it's compacted with a plate compactor, this machine, and it can loosen up. It can, if the gophers can come in there and mess things up, roots can grow, it can slough off at the edges or, start to compact even more and get thinner. And so when it's time to kind of revamp your decomposed granite, it's pretty user friendly, and it's cheap to go get. You can either order a yard of granite, or if it's a small area, you can go get some buckets of the decomposed granite, lay it out, and then plate compact it. Now, if you don't have a plate compactor, most people don't, you can rent that at a rental yard, and they're pretty cheap, and you can sometimes you can rent it for 2 hours, 4 hours, or if you need it for the whole day, you can do that, and they're pretty simple to operate. They can show you how to operate it there at the rental yard and give you the advice, and and that goes for a lot of different pieces of equipment. Don't forget about the rental yard. They're super handy to have. I know there's quite a few in town, and everything that you can dream of, they've got it there for rent. Now, before we go to break, I wanted to bring up one more thing about maintenance. I did fail to mention it in the intro, but I wanted to talk briefly about irrigation and maintaining the irrigation system, because it's absolutely key. I always say the three main things to have a green thumb is basically the pruning, the fertilizing, and irrigation. You have to do something in all three of those categories, or something's not going to go right. Something's going to go haywire. So if you're pruning and fertilizing, you never check the irrigation, something's going to not be as good as it could be. Or if you check the irrigation and fertilize, but you never prune, So I think those are really the three categories that, and really all it takes is to think about something in each of one of those. And if you're doing it on a regular basis, you're going to have a great experience with your yard, and everything's going to work out really well for you. You're going to be able to grow whatever plants that grow in this area, and even some that, it's surprising. You say, oh my gosh, I didn't know, gardenias could be grown here in this area. And yet here's somebody there's growing them. They know the right conditions, fertilizing, watering, pruning, and the sun shade requirements, and putting them on certain sides of the house, Japanese maples, keep them out of the wind, the leaves don't burn. So it's some of these things, it just takes a little bit of thought and effort. And then once they're in the ground, you've got things in the right place where they're supposed to be. The watering and the fertilizing and the pruning are really that's all there is. So on the irrigation side, you really have to check the system regularly, check for leaks. It could save you money. It could be a broken nozzle. The drip systems require a lot of maintenance. As good as they are, the drip systems do require some maintenance. They're great because they're super easy to work on. They're just compression fittings. There's no glue or anything, and you can just punch the little holes and you put the emitter in there. But they ride right on the surface, right underneath the bark or rock, and they get walked on and stepped on and raked around, and the emitters pop off, and you can have a lot of maintenance. So in one regard, they are easy to fix because they're easy to work on and easy to install. If you want to add another plant, you can just add another emitter and pop it in there. But they do require more maintenance than a hard pipe system with bubblers or spray heads or something like that. So be aware of that. Check your drip systems. They're hard to see too because they're hidden. The drips are usually buried under the bark. Hopefully it's not under any weed barrier, because then it's really difficult to find. And one of the best ways to do it, in my opinion, is walking around and listening. And so do it kind of on a quiet morning and turn the irrigation on and be out there and walk the whole drip system right when it's coming on. You can hear the air kind of going through the emitters, and you'll hear the sounds. And if you hear, obviously, the sound of running water where you shouldn't, then you can know there's a leak there. Or, sometimes they will present themselves and be a shooting stream up in the air. But if they're going off in the middle of the night and you don't know, you're not there to see what's going on, then it can be quite difficult. So we're going to talk about equipment maintenance right when we come back.
You're listening to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on California's Central Coast. Here on 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, KSMA.
This show is brought to you by Airval Block. Concrete paving stones or pavers are not all created equal. Airval Block pavers are created from a dry mix of gravel, sand, cement, and color. With very little water used, they're super strong. They won't crack or fade. And to be an Airval Block paver, the gravel and sand come from right here on the Central Coast, supporting our local community. Airval Block is the only local manufacturer of concrete masonry products like pavers, mortarless retaining wall blocks. Airval Block products are high quality for peace of mind, and there are many colors to choose from. And if you're not sure which products you need or how to use them, you will always get expert advice from the staff at Airval Block. Products made on the Central Coast for the Central Coast. Visit their fully landscaped outdoor showroom to see the many ways you can use Airval Block products at number 1 Suburban Road in San Luis Obispo, or go online at airvalblock.com.
If you're thinking about installing a new paver patio or paver driveway, check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Serving the Central Coast since 2001, Chaparral Pavers will work with you to get it right and complete the job to your specifications, as customer service is king at Chaparral Pavers. Paver driveways are stylish and durable and guaranteed to never crack. If your old concrete driveway or entryway is a hazardous cracking mess, it's time to call Chaparral Pavers. Go to their website, ilovetocomehome.com. You'll find all the information you need. Check out photographs of past installations and reviews from Central Coast residents who have used Chaparral Pavers. And don't forget, all installations are guaranteed for the life of your home. So check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Chaparral Pavers, they'll make you love to come home. Now, back to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on KSMA.
And we're back. Okay, I am Fernando Martinez, and we're here on Patio Side Chats with Chaparral. We are talking about maintenance. We talked a little bit about pruning and trimming, fertilizing, checking the irrigation, and really maintaining that yard and keeping it nice and beautiful. We also talked about some tools and renting tools. Don't forget about that rental yard. They're a great resource for all kinds of different tools and make that job easier for you. And so one thing that I did want to talk about today is maintaining tools and equipment. So let's start with your pruners. I think your pruners are the most important tool you can have, and they should feel great in your hand. They should cut beautiful, nice, sharp cuts, clean. They should be well oiled and easy. Please don't get the cheapest pruners that you can get and have them be dull and unoiled. It's just not a good experience at all. I love my Felco pruners. I've had Felco pruners for a really long time, and they are just probably one of my favorite tools. I love to I love how they feel in my hand. I love the way they cut. If you're using cheaper pruners that you can't barely get grip around, or if they're really narrow and thin, or if they put the little rubber on there that comes off and it's a really slick, slippery metal, you can hurt yourself, and it's just not fun. And really the sharpness of the pruners is key as well. So even if you have a nice pair of pruners, Corona is a good brand, but they should feel good to you and they should feel really good in your hands. Then you should make sure that because on the Filcos, you can actually replace the blade. So if you're going to invest some good money in pruners, it's not a bad idea to get a pair of pruners that you can just replace the blade, and you can keep that same, the body and the handle and all that if you really like it. Other pruners, if they're kind of a medium grade pruner, they can still be really good, and you can just sharpen that same blade so many times, and then you can just buy another pair later on. But remember to oil where they go together. There's a screw where the two pieces of blade go together, like any scissors or pruners, and put some oil on there. I do it every time, or at least I try to every time or every other time. Just spritz a little WD-40 or some sort of oil on there, and keep them lubed up, and that way it feels really good in your hand, and when you're cutting, it cuts really easy. And keep that blade really sharp. The trees and bushes have sap. So when you do a pruning job and you're out there pruning, when you're finished, there's going to be a bunch of sticky sap in between the blade and the anvil part of the pruners, and can get on the outside of the pruners and make them sticky, and they don't want to prune. Sometimes if I'm doing a really sappy plant, I might even have to stop and clean them off and put oil on them in between. So it's super, super important. Okay, now equipment, power stuff with motors and gas and air filters and oil. A lot of us have gardeners, including myself, but I still have a mower. I still blow in between. I use the blower, and you still have to maintain these things. And so if you're doing your own lawn, great, you're getting great exercise and you're out there and mowing the grass. If you don't have grass, it's pretty common, to have a blower, at least blow off the sidewalks and the pavers and whatever, and get the leaves around. And so I want to tell you, it is super, super important to clean the air filters on whether it's a lawnmower, even the blowers. They're little tiny air filters, but they need to be cleaned, especially blowers, because you're blowing dust and everything around, and it's sucking the air back in there and can get really dirty. And it's the first thing that I check when it doesn't sound right, or it's not wanting to start when you're first trying to start it, is check that air filter. Lawnmowers, same thing. There's an air filter on there. Sometimes there's a paper air filter, and sometimes there's a foam filter. There are two different types of filters. A foam filter needs to be oiled, and those are the only types of filters you put oil in them. The paper filters, they don't require anything. You just put them in there, and they are actually filtering the dust out. And so you don't want any dirt or dust or anything going in the carburetor. It's very similar to your car. You wouldn't run your car without an air filter. Hopefully you would change it if it were dirty, or if you're driving through heavy dusty conditions, you want to take your air filter out and check that. So number 2 would be to check the oil, the level of the oil, and make sure there's enough oil in there. If you have a 2-cycle, you're going to be putting the oil in the gas, and you don't have to change oil on a 2-cycle motor. So if you can check the oil separately from the gas, that's a 4-stroke, and you want to change the oil on that and keep it clean. It shouldn't look dirty, black, watery, thin, very bad for the motor. Also remember to keep the blade sharp on that lawnmower. Your grass will look much better with a nice clean cut on there. And you have to balance the blade, so take equal amounts off each side of the blade. Take a pin, stick it in that hole, and make sure it doesn't lean to one side before you put the blade back on your lawnmower. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the show today. Check out Chaparral Pavers on Facebook and get your question answered on the air.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ilovetocomehome.com to find out more or call 805-588-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chat here on KSMA.